I'm sort of a wanderer by nature. I wouldn't go quite as far as to say I'm a vagrant, but it was also no surprise to find myself walking along a dark, somewhat unfamiliar path last night, about 5 or so miles from my apartment. I'm also the curious type. When I see something that intrigues me or looks interesting, I can't resist checking it out. So it was also no shock to find myself walking toward a somewhat strange-looking forest. It was pretty dark, but looking through the rows and rows of trees fascinated me. It was the type of forest that looked intentionally planted, with tons of tall, skinny trees, in rows, reaching up high like long, spindly arms, thrusting through the soil toward the sky. I decided I would enter. I had no regard for the rules, because plastered around a small clearing that appeared to be an entrance into the forest were signs that clearly read "Do not enter" and "No trespassing." The bright orange letters were nearly glowing against the jet black backdrop of the signs. The images burned brightly in my brain now. I probably should have listened to the signs, but I'm also a bit stubborn. I have some character flaws. It's okay, we all do. I looked around to see if anyone saw me, as I sort of felt like I had eyes bearing down on the back of my neck. But the part of town I was in was very much on the outskirts, and I didn't see anyone. I was mostly worried about police. I couldn't afford another ticket. I made my way through the makeshift entryway and plunged deeper through the trees. I paused as I thought I heard footsteps, but instead watched a group of 5 or 6 deer walking through the woods, making sure not to move so they didn't get spooked. They were majestic. As they fed, I couldn't help thinking about all of my friends who hunt. It's the Midwest, so damn near everyone hunts. I imagined them waiting in the shadows, dressed to the hilt in blaze orange, guns at the ready, with these peaceful animals in their sights until they pulled the trigger. As the imaginary blast went off, so did the deer. They ran, and I pushed forward. I saw some more wildlife. A fox, a few possums. They were pretty cool too. Nature is a wonderful beast. I kept walking until I found a clearing. It was a large circle that looked very man-made. Stumps littered the outer rim of the circle, and I walked up to one and took a seat, the sounds of nature still blasting around me. I realized this must be some sort of hangout for teens in the area. Roaches and discarded empty beer cans littered the ground. Off in the distance, I saw glowing from the window of a cabin. I must have reached almost the back of this forest, after walking 45 minutes or so. It was understandably small, as I was still in town. I had never seen this cabin before, though. I sat looking up at the stars and the moon for a bit, before I decided it was time to head back. When I started to get up, I heard some rustling, and figured it was just some more animals. I turned and saw light flooding from the end of a flashlight, nearly pouring into the clearing I was in. I thought about running, but realized how sketchy that would look, and figured maybe I could talk my way out of it. My fears came true when I saw a blue uniform bursting through the trees, flashlight in hand, and pointed at my face. I squinted, nearly blinded until my eyes adjusted to the light. What I saw was not outwardly horrifying, but unsettling. This man looked strange beyond compare. He was tall, at least 8 inches taller than I stood, and I'm about 6'2". His legs were long and wiry, like the trees that littered the forest. His torso looked impossibly short, and his arms nearly matched the length of his legs. His mouth was wide and toothy, and his eyes were piercingly ice blue. He finally opened his mouth to speak after a few seconds of silence. "What are you doing here?" he asked. light from the moon reflecting off his badge. He spoke slowly. His voice was light and airy, sort of dreamy and soft. It was almost calming. His name tag shone as well. Alistair Attenborough. Strange name, I thought to myself. Hey, I realize this is private property. I'm sorry, I said, trying to remain calm and talk my way out of this imminent issue. He scanned the ground, like he was looking for something. I realize this looks bad. All of this stuff on the ground isn't mine, though. It was like this when I got here, I said, realizing I was starting to sound defensive. Fuck, another ticket probably incoming. I started wondering which bill I wouldn't pay this month. He said softly. I couldn't read him. It seemed like he believed me and didn't believe me at the same time. Yes, do you have some identification? I slowly withdrew my wallet and handed him my ID. He flashed his flashlight on it, scanning it intently. This is when I started to look at him a little more closely. I realized his blue pants were ratty and worn out. My town is poor, and they defund damn near everything, so maybe his uniform was just old. His belt was nearly falling apart too. I realized he didn't have a gun, a taser, or even a baton. As a matter of fact, he didn't have much of anything, just a police shirt and these pants. I began to question what was happening. Hey, just out of curiosity, could I get your badge number? I asked. I've had some questionable encounters with police I trailed off. I looked down at his hands as he turned to me. In one hand, my ID and a flashlight. In the other, a syringe. I turned and ran, sprinting through trees, my shoulders crashing into branches, and low-lying sticks that had fallen to the ground, scratched against my legs. I briefly turned to look, and the officer was running behind me as well. He ran so strangely. His arms stayed almost completely still at his sides, drooping down by his knees. His stride looked so slow and effortless, but he was running almost as fast as I was. My heart pounded and my lungs burned, but I didn't stop until I reached the entryway. I didn't see him once I got out of the woods. As I ran, I realized I was coming up on a gas station and sprinted inside. The clerk gave me a terrified look, like I was about to rob them or something. I soon realized it was probably because my shirt was torn, there was blood gently trickling from my arms where I had cut them on branches, and I was panting like a dog. I just need to use your bathroom, I managed to stammer out. I locked myself in the stall and caught my breath. I tried to calm down, but understandably, it was a bit difficult. I decided to call the police and tell them everything. As I stood outside the gas station, explaining to the dispatcher what had happened, they sent officers my way. I explained everything to them, and they searched the woods to no avail. They found not a trace of Alistair Attenborough, or whatever his real name was. The officers probably thought I was insane, but luckily they didn't give me a trespassing ticket and offered me a ride home. I hadn't smoked in a couple of years, but I asked if they would wait while I bought a pack. I think they realized how stressed out this whole situation had made me, and seemed like nice guys, so they obliged. When I got to the counter, the clerk asked for my ID. It wasn't there. Alistair still had it. My heart sank. He had my name. He had my address. He knew who I was. I asked the police to search my apartment, and they found no trace of entry, nobody hiding in the apartment, and nothing out of place. They offered to station an officer outside for the night, as they could see I was visibly shaken, but there wasn't much they could do outside of that. Under the letter of the law, nobody had committed a crime, except me, really, and nobody was under investigation. Nothing happened overnight, but I'm so scared. Every time I hear something rustle or something tap against the window, I expect to see his wide smile and his compact pug-like face staring back in at me. Who knows what was in that syringe or what he wanted to do?
I'll start with some information about myself. I'm a 22-year-old college student in the Tampa Bay area in Florida. Every night I like to go for a run. Usually no one is out, so I'll run to the station, get a drink, and walk back. I guess I used it as a way to relieve stress. I did this for 3 months where nothing bad happened. Passed a few shady people, but that's about it. One night in February, I go to the gas station and see a girl around my age parked on the side looking under her hood. She made eye contact with me and I offered help. The girl was around 5.5 feet tall, dark hair, and was really sweet. She asked if I knew anything about cars, and like most men my age, I acted like the reincarnation of Henry Ford. After about 5 minutes of searching, I find a wire severed and show her. She starts cursing a bit. Have to admit it was cute. I told her I'd give you a ride home, but she interrupts me and finished with, "You ran here? I've seen you a few times." Being a young guy, I get my hopes up after that comment. "I can walk you home if you'd like." She smiled and said she lived 10 blocks away and always noticed me coming from the opposite direction. "I just don't want to impose. What else have I got to do at 2:30 a.m.? I replied with a smile, to which she smiled back. At that moment, a truck pulled up and asked if we needed help. The girl, who at this point told me her name was Sarah, told him that the car broke down but she was fine and I'm walking her home. The man laughed in a pretty rude way and said, "Walk? Sweetie, I'll just give you a ride home." Sarah looked at me for a second, the kind of look that makes you feel uncomfortable. After a minute or so, she agreed to take the ride from the guy. I asked her if I can give her my number just so I know she gets home safe. She handed me her phone. I typed it in and she was on her way. So I go inside the gas station, get my drink and head home, nervously waiting for her call that never came. I figured she just took it to be polite. That's why she opted for the ride home, so I went to bed. The next few days went by normal. Didn't see her again, but her car sat in the same spot. Sure, I had got my hopes up, but I wasn't crushed. Then I finally see her car gone. It was kind of a relief because it means I won't awkwardly see her working on it. I go inside, get a drink, and go to pay. At the news rack, I see an article. A girl in her 20s was found essentially destroyed. The police had a hard time identifying her because of the damage. Only clue they had were some large truck tires near the scene. I asked the cashier when Sarah had gotten the car. I was certain I was overreacting, but I was curious. The cashier said a man in a truck used tow cables and pulled it. He had her keys, though. I tried to convince myself that I'm just connecting unrelated dots. The whole walk home I thought about it. Felt guilty. Then I realized the wire had a clean cut, like a wire cutter did it. Originally I assumed it just snagged on something or an animal bit it. I'm not sure if what I think happened did really happen. I feel guilty though, like I allowed it to happen. It keeps me up. I still go on the walks, hoping to see her, but haven't yet. Hopefully I'll run into her tonight, or even the guy to ask him what happened. I'll update if I get more information.
It was around 2 a.m. the last time I went for a walk in that neighborhood. It was the middle of the summer. I needed to get my routine walk in and clear my head. I had a usual route I would take that would lead me past my street, up 3 or 4 blocks, and onto the main street for a bit, before I circled back around an alley that was behind the wall of my backyard. Not exactly the best, but it was the one I had used countless times. But for some reason, I just had this feeling that I shouldn't go onto the main street. Like I said before, it was around 2 a.m., and I didn't have my phone on me for whatever reason. I actually felt terrified for a moment as I looked down the sidewalk and past the street lights. There weren't any cars around, or anyone else out, which wouldn't be too unusual if it wasn't for the gas station that was on the main street and the McDonald's across from it. Those were usually the places for potheads at this time, but there wasn't anyone. It was dead silent except for my footsteps and the buzzing of the streetlights. I've never been afraid of the dark, not even as a little kid, but I was scared and nervous for some reason. I figured I was just being a wimp and continued on my route. I really wish now that I had just turned around and gone home, like my gut was telling me to do. As I walked down the main street, the feelings I was having got stronger, and I felt my stomach tighten as I passed by the empty gas station and down onto a street that during the day looked normal, but right then it was terrifying, as there were no lights around, and it was a long stretch to the next one. I remember swallowing hard and forcing one foot in front of the other. It would have been pointless to turn back and go the other way home, as I could see the entrance to the alley at the next lamp post. That's when I heard something that made my heart jump in my chest and my stomach clench. A truck's engine broke the silence, and I jumped when headlights were suddenly on me. There wasn't any way a car could have snuck up on me without me seeing the headlights or hearing it beforehand, much less a truck. I froze and thought maybe the truck was just passing and trying to make sure it didn't hit me, as there weren't sidewalks on this part of the street. But it didn't pass me. I heard the engine getting closer and closer. I remember reaching into my shorts pocket for my knife and clenching my fist around it tight enough to hurt. Slowly I kept walking and kept my head looking forward as I tried to make it down the dark street. So many things were going on in my head. I was remembering horror stories I'd read online and in newspapers about girls being abducted and killed, raped, sold, and everything in between. I tried to remember the self-defense unit my gym class taught a few months before. I mainly thought of my grandma in bed, thinking I was okay. I could hear the truck getting closer, and I tried to pick up the pace. That's when the engine revved, and I could basically feel the heat from the headlights on my back. I broke into a dead sprint and ran faster than I think I ever had in my life. I could hear the truck still so close behind me, and now I knew it was following me. Never had I thought I'd be in this situation. My lungs were screaming by the time I made it to the alley entrance, but I couldn't stop running. At the time, I didn't know where I was running to, only that I needed to keep going. My chest hurt, my eyes stung, my legs ached, and I wanted to scream at whoever was following me to leave me alone. It wasn't until I turned a sharp corner down a street I recognized that I felt even an ounce of safety. The truck didn't turn down the street, as I'm sure the driver didn't think I'd turn so quickly. Instead, it drove right past, but then I heard screeching tires and a door opening and slamming shut. Now I was dead terrified, and tried to remember if I was on a street that could take me home or take me to a friend's house that lived nearby. I've never been religious, but I thanked whatever gods there were right then when I saw the name of the street, and I knew I was only 2 blocks from my friend's house. But I could hear someone behind me, and they were close. I could hear their panting just as well as I could hear my own, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep running. I could see my friend's house at the next street corner, and I don't know how I managed to get there without passing out or being caught. I pounded on the front door, waking the neighborhood up, I'm sure, screaming and begging for him or his parents to open the door. I turned around quickly when I heard a sharp intake of breath and what sounded like a growl. The person was standing at the edge of the driveway, breathing hard, and I kept pounding on the door. I kept screaming and hitting until the lights inside the house turned on. I looked back and he was gone. My friend's father opened the door, looking beyond pissed off, but before he could start yelling, I lost it. I was crying while babbling and trying to say what just happened. The look on his face went from anger to concern, and he pulled me inside. I didn't stop crying until my friend came into the room and basically shook me to calm me down. He and his father listened intently as I told them what happened. I ended up staying there until sunrise when my friend drove me home. My grandma was already awake and looked concerned as to why I hadn't been home already, or why I was being driven. Part of me wanted to not tell her anything, so she wouldn't worry, or say, "I told you so," but another wave of fear came over me, and I cried again. I told her everything, and she immediately demanded we call the police and report it. I didn't want to. I didn't want to have to think about it ever again, even though technically nothing had happened. She refused to hear it, and an hour later, 2 police were sitting in our living room, asking me to explain everything again. Apparently there had been reports of a truck driving up and down the main street all night before I had been out, and how the driver of the truck had stopped at the gas station and acted strangely towards the cashier. They asked me to describe the truck or the person, but I couldn't. My best description was the truck was black and looked new, and the person was taller than me, and they wore all black and had long hair. They ended up saying that was close enough to what the gas station attendant had said. They said they'd be in touch if there were any more questions that came up, or if they found a suspect. They never called or came back. I did my best for the next month to forget about it and be calm, but I couldn't go on night walks anymore. My grandma refused to let me, and my own fear and anxiety was enough to keep me locked safely in my room. About a month or so later, the fear that I'd gotten rid of sunk its way back into me. I had just gotten home from school, and I went into the living room to say hello to my grandma. She was on the sofa with a hand over her mouth. I was confused before I looked at the TV. There was a school photo of a girl. The girl didn't live too far away from me, and was a sophomore at a rival school. And she was last seen 2 nights before. I've moved states since then, and haven't heard anything about the girl who went missing. But no matter what time it is, or where I am, I can't help but freeze at the sound of a truck engine, and wonder if they found me. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. If you want me to tell your story or read a creepypasta, email me at the address in the description. I want to thank CreepyKid Pasta for working with me. Go check out his channel. I put a link in the description. Be good to animals, even people. So
Ja, snämmar, Bergsbus, Hirsch.
her name is Ripley, and she's my sis, and yeah, and my sis. You gonna go potty?